Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to see is an absolutely incredible interview, but not only an interview, this is an opening to a doorway that can actually help us understand the true nature of reality. There is so much in this world that is hidden, that is misconstrued, that is lied about. We are deceived constantly on this planet when it comes to the real state of affairs, why things are happening, why conflicts are brewing, technology that exists, the existence of extraterrestrials. The list goes on and on and on. It seems never ending. And our one chance to truly get to the bottom of things, to truly have a fighting chance at understanding what's the truth with all of this disinformation and misinformation that we are just overwhelmed with, is tapping into certain abilities, tapping into things like astral projections, out-of-body experiences, and remote viewing. And remote viewing is what this interview is all about. We have a team from Intuitive Underground that is here today, and with them, we are going to dive into some of the biggest questions about existence, about life, and about the beyond, most importantly. Because what's so important about this interview is that the secrecy, the lies, the manipulation, it does not end with life and existence on this planet. Unfortunately, I believe that there's a strong, strong chance that the manipulation continues on and on. The manipulation systems go into the afterlife, into the existence of consciousness itself, and we are potentially in a system that continues to contain us while in this life and beyond. So it is very imperative that we understand what is going on. And like I said, our chance to get some real answers is using these capabilities or leaning on people that have experience with these capabilities and that have mastered these capabilities. So buckle up. We are about to ask the biggest questions that you can ask about life, existence, and what is really going on. So without further ado, welcome to the interview of Intuitive Underground. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. But this is not a typical video. This is not me breaking down a subject or diving deep into a book or different videos. This is the real deal. This is an interview, and not only just any interview, this is an interview that I have been absolutely dying to get and to have, because on this quest and on this journey that I'm on right now to understand the nature of reality and to figure out decoding the purpose of life, which is effectively the objective of this channel, we need knowledge. We need direct knowledge. There is so much manipulation and information on this planet right now, and it is just so hard to wade through everything. And I think one of the keys to figuring out what is really going on is using these special psychic abilities that certain people have cultivated and honed, aka via OBEs, through astral projection. But now we're going to be talking about remote viewing today. And this is a team that, if you guys have been watching the channel, I've made a breakdown of a super long video that they posted, mind-blowing stuff. I couldn't believe it not many people had seen it. Blew my mind. I did a big breakdown. I know people really were enjoying a lot of the tidbits that these gentlemen had to share. And beyond, there's a bigger team even at play for Intuitive Underground. But two of the gentlemen here, Dan and Morgan, have joined me today. And all I got to say is buckle up. We're going to be breaking down everything there is to remote viewing, every targets that they've looked at, data that they've extracted. And if you really want to know what is going on this planet and beyond this planet and in the astral, beyond the astral, this is the show. So without further ado, Dan, Morgan Farrell, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Right, absolutely. So we're going to break this down in a way for people that are brand new to remote viewing. I want them to understand what it is first, right? So we're going to talk. I want to start from the top, and either of you guys can jump in here, but let's start at the basics. What is remote viewing?
Okay. Remote viewing is ultimately you could make the argument that it's actually misnamed because it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with viewing, vision, seeing. It has more to do with it involves all perceptual channels, or it can. It can be associated with clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. But ultimately, it's an expanded perceptual discipline.
And by the way, is there a way you could back up a little bit from the? I'm getting a little bit of feedback now. I wasn't before, but I'm just getting a tiny bit of feedback. Is there a way? Or yeah, I don't know if that would fix it. Try now.
Okay, how's that?
I'm getting that. Do you hear that as well?
Nope.
Shoot. Okay. All right. Let's just give it a shot. It's very minor. I don't think it's a major issue, but let's just keep rolling. Okay. So Morgan, so sorry about that. Go ahead. Take it away.
No problem. So you're asking about what is remote viewing? Well,
yes.
It's at the end of the day, remote viewing is about expanded perception and control over that expanded perception. Realistically, you can think of remote viewing as much as anything as an attention management skill. And what I mean by that is it has to do with training yourself to divert your attention from your immediate surroundings to, probably the best way to think of it is a pattern of information. So remote viewing fundamentally operates on the concept that at the core of all existence is information, and that this information field can be accessed mentally by virtually anyone, at least any quote unquote normally functioning human being should be able. Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify. So basically, are you effectively saying that there's a field of information, let's say, right? And all the information is potentially available to us. We just have to tap in or maybe change our frequency so we can access that information?
Yeah, the concept, and of course, at the end of the day, we don't know how remote viewing works. Because we don't know how a lot of things work, especially when you get into the realm of consciousness, conscious awareness. We don't know how that works at all. And so the best that we can do is come up with some approximation and turn it into a working model until we have something better to go on. The underlying concept is largely based in Jungian psychology, the concept of that our minds operate in kind of different capacities. So for example, conscious awareness, subconscious, you have preconscious processing in there, and then down below that, the unconscious. Now, the idea is, probably you've seen some variation of the iceberg model, where you have the tip of the iceberg represents conscious awareness, and the lower part of the iceberg represents the rest of your mental capacity immersed in this sea of information. And that underlying that sea, that's where everything below that threshold, the lemon, really is all connected. So you could think in that analogy of the sea as that field of information, wherein, let's say, each drop, or perhaps even each individual water molecule, contains the information of the whole in a sort of a holographic kind of fractal fashion. That's kind of the underlying idea. And again, it's just, for now, it's a working model. It seems to explain what we see happening.
Now we talk about this idea that it doesn't, you don't exactly know how it works, right? But you're tapping into something. Now, how are you guys able to verify that you're actually tapping into let's say, legitimate information? What are some of your verification methods?
Okay, well, when you're training, and periodically, when you're through training and you move to operational remote viewing, but especially when you're training, you work against readily verifiable targets. However, you work in what we call a blind condition. And that essentially means that the viewer has zero foreknowledge of the nature of their target. So a given target could be any person, place, thing, or event, or theoretically even a thought or an idea, because again, that all exists as information. So in a training scenario, the instructor will set up a target. It's a predetermined, we would call it a discrete target, which is to say that it's a very specifically identified thing, like I say, person, place, thing, event, readily verifiable. And so what they'll do is we'll set that up in a process we call formalizing the target. And the target can be, I could write it out. I could use a photograph as reference. Now, it's important to remember that in most cases, the photograph is not actually your target. It's simply a reference point, a signpost, if you will. In any case, whatever the target is, let's say something simple like we'll say the Eiffel Tower. Everyone always says the Eiffel Tower. So I would take either a reference photo, or I would simply write out the Eiffel Tower, Paris, France. And then I may add what we would call a temporal qualifier. So now or present time. And then that way, every conceivable aspect of the target is completely predefined. It's now set in stone. That's your target. As a mechanism to blind the viewer, what we do is we attach something we call a TRN, or target reference number. We use 8 digits. The number itself is completely arbitrary. You can think of it as nothing more than a file number. Okay, so let's just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's your number. So then the viewer is simply provided that the TRN, target reference number. Okay, now their job is to engage in remote viewing in a method of their choosing. And the method is really a whole other topic. There are numerous methods. They're quite different between one another. Dan and I come from the technical remote viewing school. We were trained by Major Ed Dames, and sadly we just lost him a couple of months ago at the end of March. So RIP Ed, and thanks for everything. Ed was he was a unique character in the field of remote viewing, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but speaking at least for myself, I specifically chose Ed to be my mentor because to me, he displayed a very unique kind of strategic thinking in the application of remote viewing that I didn't quite see elsewhere. He had a really very forward vision of what remote viewing could be at its best. He did a lot. He was the first of the military remote viewers to start a company, a private consultation and training company in the private sector.
And I've looked up and tried to research as well remote viewing. And the idea is you write down the number. It has no significance, so there's no bias. But is it that there's almost like a mental energy, that is my understanding, that's connected to the person that writes down the number, knows the target, and it's through this sort of like mental connection that they know what the target is. That's how you basically then try to seek that target. Am I kind of getting that right?
Yeah, chain of custody. Yeah.
Chain of custody, yeah, sure. It's again, this kind of comes down to, we don't really know how it works, but yeah, that appears to be how it works. And there's this whole kind of debate actually in remote viewing about the extent to which the role of intention in targeting, and frankly, that's a whole can of worms that we probably don't need to go into because it could get quite technical and extensive. But yeah, at the end of the day, there absolutely is some intention plays some role in it. And I mean, ultimately, even as the remote viewer, ultimately it is through, will and intention that you're proceeding through, your chosen method. So
I would add that, depending on the school in which your methodology is, that it's not, your tasker's intent is more or less as a pointer, as a, hey, these are the numbers, and as a technical remote viewer, we're trained to go to the cue to understand what it is we're going after to describe. Now, not necessarily name, but describe. Some others will have larger paragraphs of how in which they're supposed to view it. And then there's this whole idea that tasker's intent sometimes plays a role. There is, depending on how much you allow, mostly prescribed by your training. When we first started out back in 2012, we were very neophyte viewers, but the methodology in which we train, we're mostly hitting photographic targets to begin with. Others, sometimes they're outbounder experiments in which someone is out or going out to get feedback somewhere. And we train extensively for about 100 to 200 sessions to try and get our level of accuracy up. And at some point, all we're doing is a repeatable method with our mind. We're attaching to the site. We're describing sounds, taste, textures, temperatures, sounds, and visuals. And at that point, we're allowed to adjudicate just slightly and explore the target as we go through, because you're basically using your fingers, your sight, your touch, and everything else to kind of somewhat try and get a hold of whatever this pattern of idea or this pattern of information is. And slowly over time, your accuracy increases because majority of what's being fed to you is being fed to you in an unconscious way through the liminal gate into your conscious awareness. So what it looks like essentially is we're just sitting at a table, and it looks like we're just doing paperwork, but we're going through a mental process as we go through this that we've done hundreds, if not thousands of times already. And at the end of that, you get visual data and you get written data. You then take that written data and you turn it into what is basically a summary of the site. And at the end of it, you have a visual page and you have a written page describing what it is that you're going after. And again, we're blind, preferably double blind, meaning that the tasker doesn't even know. The person that I got the TRNs from doesn't even know. So the double blind method is something that kind of arose in the SRI days, or Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. It just arose from the scientific method. Remote viewing is demonstratable. It is repeatable. We just don't have, we have a working hypothesis of how it works. But until we actually get further as a society, more open as a scientific community to being able to understand consciousness and what it really is and what's going on, we really won't have a full working model of 100% what this is exactly. And there are people out there to this day that are still, out in the lab coats doing these sorts of things.
Totally.
And that's
well, and to be fair,
some of it.
I have to add in, there is always a factor of how far will this stuff be allowed to progress? How much will we be allowed to know? Because remote viewing, and the father of remote viewing, Ingo Swann, he was an advocate, a major advocate of individual empowerment through, remote viewing being one modality to assist in that. He wrote a couple of books called Secrets of Power, and they're very, very interesting reads. They basically have to do with, obviously, individual personal empowerment, but it's largely to do with personal empowerment inside of a sort of a control system as we find ourselves in, worldly, geopolitical, and frankly beyond. So there's always that kind of an X factor.
For sure.
It's a world with remote viewing. The term or the phrase that they came up with many years ago was that a world with remote viewing is a world without secrets.
I've thought about this before. I've thought about this like in the sense of a world with, let's say, universal remote viewing or one stream of consciousness. We could potentially end the ability to have secrecy and sort of open things up, which we're going to get into that later in terms of how all this fits together. And that seems to be in opposition to a system that is currently in place, but we'll definitely get there. I just want to go back to one thing real quick in terms of those remote viewing experiences, right? You guys have a target. You guys are training. You said you did 100 sessions or 200 sessions in order to hone this ability. Were any of these targets ever let's say something along these lines, where you're in a building. I'm just kind of making up an example. You're in a building, and the person you're remote viewing is at the other end of the building in a room, writing something on a piece of paper or doing something. And your objective is to remote view into that room and essentially observe that person and then say, hey, were we doing this? And then you verify it by the person coming out, or video footage or something later saying, yep, you hit that target. And do you guys ever do anything like this?
I mean, you can. I kind of prefer not to.
Okay.
The closest variant on something like that would be choosing, a place, maybe even someplace locally that like a building, a publicly accessible building that you've never been inside, and just there's a particular kind of grammatical language and a kind of a syntax to the way that you would effectively set up a target. But using that format, you would basically, again, as using the signpost analogy, you would write a cue directing the viewer's attention to, let's say, the interior of the lobby of this building you've never been in, and maybe something like the most recognizable feature. So something fairly superlative and specific. So, the most recognizable feature can be only one thing, most recognizable being a superlative. Therefore, you are either going to be correct or you're not. So, yeah, you'd run the session and then, walk or drive your way down to the building, walk in and see how you did. They're all kinds of novel kind of targeting strategies that you can come up with while working in a training capacity, because it really doesn't matter as long as you have that fully verifiable feedback that you did not know beforehand, because that is how you learn, is by comparing your results to reality. And by way of, that's how do you learn anything? By the mistakes you make and telling yourself, don't do that again.
100%. And then you're checking the accuracy and you're seeing what's going on. And I think this is why I want to ask that, because I think this is important for people that are brand new to remote viewing, are saying, what is this? How do you know what I mean? And so just to understand the methodology, I think is going to be useful for people. This kind of goes back to the idea of the training. And I know you were mentioning your mentor, Morgan, and maybe Dan, you can even jump in on this as well. Yeah. You're mentioning your mentor, and this is, I think, very important for people to understand, because your mentor is not somebody who was doing remote viewing, let's say, privately and just developed the skill. No, they're in the military. Yeah. And so I think, and the fact that they're in the military, and I think there's a connection with the CIA and the military with remote viewing. People got to start listening and paying attention to this stuff, because if it's being used by these organizations, there's obviously something very substantial and significant about it. So can you talk a little bit about the training that you received from the military?
Just to kind of put a capper on the last part that we were talking about, you're describing in your previous question was what's called an outbounder experiment. Okay. The majority of the early experiments with Ingo Swann, Pat Price, Hella Hammond, were outbounder type experiments.
I wouldn't say majority, but that was one strategy. Yes,
right. The reason why I say is at some point they got very bored of it. They didn't want to do it anymore. They did do a fair amount of those. We have run a target, essentially, if I remember correctly, it was something along the lines of me/now, where what we're doing with the target at that point is a way to kind of improve the skills of the viewers that we have going. In that particular project, is to have them describe themselves remote viewing in the moment while they're remote viewing it. Interesting things do pop out. We did run that at least once, probably twice, if I remember correctly. And we've had other tangential targets that kind of show up and show the same thing. And where people come back, it's like, this really looks like remote viewing. Like, I'm not sure. And then they see the cue, and obviously at that point, they're unconscious. We'll see the data that it did give out, and then see the cue. And then, okay, these are the corrections that need to be made. As to our backgrounds, ultimately I got started prepping. I was prepping. I was coin roll hunting. It was around Fukushima had just happened, and Ed had been on Art Bell show describing this event. later in
And just to explain, Art Bell, you're talking about
Coast to Coast AM. Sorry.
Coast to Coast. So this show, by the way, if you guys are unfamiliar, probably a lot of people are listening are familiar, but this show dealt with all sorts of wild, like very fascinating, interesting phenomena back in the day. Right. But anyways,
conspiracy theory, other things. Excuse me. I was coin roll hunting. I don't know how I happened on the show, but Fukushima had just happened. It'd been like 3-4 days later, and here's this guy on the radio talking about what's going on, and I had no idea who Ed was. I had no idea who George Norrie was. I had no idea of anything about such matters. And over time, I come to find out that Ed had actually, and his team had remote viewed this Fukushima disaster and had been warning about it since about 2007. It happened in 2011. Now, that's the official date. I would probably put it around 2005, 2006. But the dude was about 80 to 90% accurate in the information that he provided in that particular show. I don't have the show's date off the top of my head, but it's easy to go back in their archives. It's out there on the internet. You can find it. So over the course of a little while, I just started looking into Ed Dames. And, of course, there's a lot of smoke out there about the guy. He didn't do everything perfect. He was trying to warn people about things that he saw coming. Some things that were correct, a fair amount. I would argue more correct than not. So after having gone through all this stuff, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll give this a shot. I'll take a look. And I did the first target from his training disc, and I was like, okay, there's something here. It warranted more effort into try and find, does this actually work? So did a little more work. Before I know it, I'd done enough for myself to know that it really worked. The only question was, how well could I get it to work for me and what I wanted to do? So I started out with the at-home, bootstrapped it. And after about a year and a half, I take a scratch that, go back about 3 to 4 months after starting the DVD set and getting through, I basically got together with Morgan and a few other different viewers, and we had a practice group, and we would just practice targets. This is circa like 2012, 2013. And slowly after that, I'd spent some time and some money to train with one of Ed's personalized, approved trainers. So I spent some time with them, got better at the skill. So fast forward to about 2016, we'd been working together, about 5 or 6 of us steady, 2-3 times a week at that point for 5 or 6 years. And at that point, I spent the money, drove out to California, just outside of Sacramento, up near Folsom area, and trained with Ed for about a week, 2 weeks, about 8 days total. After that, usually after those, you're pretty decimated, and you still got new skills that you need to work into the fold. And with learning these new skills, it takes a little bit of time to get the unconscious to really, 1, get used to the new methodology that you're trying to learn, and then 2, get your accuracy up, which takes a fair amount of time. And after that point, we had been working together for 8 years, and in 2024, I think fall of 24, I went and saw Paul Smith, who was also one of the original guys in the Stargate program. I couldn't tell you exactly which version of the Stargate program it was, whether it was Centerline, Girl Flame, or Stargate.
Can you explain what is the Stargate program for people that are unfamiliar with it?
So there's a little bit of misinformation going out there these days about the GATE program, right? I'm not sure if you experienced this. I experienced this as a kid, where first, second grade, you get the funny looking headphones and the pink drink.
I know about it. But I didn't participate in it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
I remember going through it. I don't really remember anything else about it, to be honest. Now, was that by a function of that's what they were doing, is making sure the kids couldn't remember what the pink drink? I'm not sure. I've talked to other high school friends and other, college level people that I went to school with, and a lot of them had done the same thing. So right now, this is hitting social media right now over the last, say, 5-6 months, where they're talking about the GATE program. And I've seen a lot of, whether it's TikTok or YouTube, excuse me, that are kind of moving the two together between Stargate and GATE. Stargate was not a part of the GATE program, at least as far as I'm aware of. There's still a bunch that's not classified at this point from the Stargate days. They say about 80 to 90% is out there. I talked to Paul Smith. I think in that conversation, he said the majority of it was still classified. At least the targets and what they were working against back then in the mid 70s to clear up until the late 80s, early 90s. Also, there's also this the Stargate thing that Trump has been doing, They renamed another project Stargate. I believe it has to do with Anthropic. I'm not sure. Somebody might be able to correct me in the comments, but
something to do with AI. Yeah.
Yeah, something to do with AI, and they're conflating the two. It's something I've had a long belief of quite some time. Is there's a whitewashing going on? There's a cultural. I hesitate to use the word psyop, but it's out there. I mean, you think about palm readers, psychics, and other those sorts of things. And generally, when you first think of those words, they're not a positive thing. You look at the men at Stare Goats, like they were trying to tell a comedic version of actual events that did happen. They've got the characters for the most part correct, but again, it's another intentional whitewashing to try and cover up the stuff to make it like, oh, you don't want this. This is, fringe, whatever, occultish, and at the end of the program, as Ed would say, the witches came involved, where they started getting astrologers and a few witches and a few other different people to try and, I don't know if they were trying to actually see if there was any value in these skill sets, but it seems as if they were trying to discredit things towards the end so that they could wrap a nice bow on top and put it away and put it on the shelf. So me personally, go ahead.
I think a lot of that, I'm not sure it was purposeful as much as it just became diluted, because by that time, later in the RV program, all of the originals were gone. So you get what you get with anything, with any newly developed skill, you get generation loss, with each newly trained generation. And that happened fairly rapidly, as far as I can tell, inside of the Stargate program. And yeah, but to the point where by the end of it, you had people doing like tarot card readings and just any kind of random psychic functioning. And it had completely lost its way from the disciplined, rigorous, developed skill that it really was at its peak. In my opinion, the peak of, and just to jump back to your question about actually Stargate. So
yes.
Stargate really it was the final name of the remote viewing program before it was shut down and later declassified.
And so who was conducting this remote viewing program? Was it the Army? Was it the CIA? Who was it?
It went back and forth. It changed hands a number of times throughout its existence. So at times it was under CIA control. At times it was under DIA control. So yeah, it kind of went back and forth.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was being run for something like 20 years. Is that? Am I right about that?
23. 1972 was the initial kind of, let's see if there's anything going on here, right? Because we all know the kind of the basic history behind it. The idea was the intelligence communities kind of, they'd been hearing rumors for some time at that point, and they started to become credible rumors that the Soviet bloc was using psychics for some form of espionage with some degree of success. They had a psychic spy program in the East. So military doctrine, and obviously it makes sense. Anything they're doing, we need to do better. Mm-hmm. That's the idea, right? So that kind of, and how do you start that? Well, you get some open-minded scientists, physicists. You have them design as best they can airtight testing protocols, and then you bring in credible or apparently credible psychics, and you test them under those conditions. And they went above and beyond. In fact, they brought in professional cold readers, stage magicians, and everything to consult with them and say, how can you help us make these experiments airtight? And so very quickly they found out that, just like Dan said, and just like I had the same experience when I first started, very quickly I found out, okay, there is something going on here. There's some effect. Like, as a first timer, I wasn't good, but it was enough that there's something happening here.
And I just want to throw something in here. By the way, while I say this, would you, Morgan, just see if you can maybe reconnect your mic? I don't know if that's going to fix it. I know both Dan and Morgan said we should anticipate some potential technical glitches. Unfortunately, it's very minor. I don't think it should be a big deal. Just see if there's anything you can reconfigure the mic, or if that might help. But real quick, I want to say something as Morgan's doing that. just think about what they've just talked about, and the lengths to which the government tried to investigate this, and the length of this time period that this program was run. 23 years, operated by multiple branches of the government. The reason why I say this is because when you look this stuff up online or get the AI summary or the overview, what it often will say is that, yeah, it's declassified. There's documents that are now released. I'm sure it's a small smattering of documents, but they say that after those 23 years, and I laughed when I read this, after those 23 years, that there weren't major substantial findings in relation or connection to the technology or to this process actually meriting further review, which I thought was bananas to me. Like, what are your thoughts when you see something like that, Dan or Morgan, when you see something like that where they say it was researched for the program went for 23 years, they're saying, yeah, but it was kind of inconclusive.
Yeah, $25-30 million they spent on that. You should be able to take a look at everything that they've had. I can understand some of the Cold War targets looking into, where's this hostage? Where's this down plane in Africa? Although that one in particular I don't think it's been fully released, but a fair amount of Hella's work is out there on that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the sensitive stuff, I'm sure, from behind the Iron Curtain. Yeah, I mean, sure, there's reason for having some of it classified. I get that. But, your government spent a lot of money and a lot of time when a lot of people spent a lot of money and a lot of time to, see if there's something there. And then to start whitewashing it right afterwards and then try to discredit it and keep it discredited, whether it's, with a statistician or a skeptic, or, other media personalities coming in to kind of whitewash, yeah, it's really sad. But I think at this point and where we're at right now, I feel that there's a lot of people who are waking up, not only being awake, but also having the courage to ask those questions. And not only that, but to have the courage to try it for themselves. A lot of these days, we'll be on whether it's a Reddit forum, although we don't really spend too much time on Reddit anymore, but a Facebook group or somewhere else. And you get those skeptics like, yeah, prove it to me. It's like, well, to be honest, I spent my time. I investigated it for myself. I hope that you would spend your time to look into it for yourself. We're not going to have all the answers.
I want to do that. Like, if I were to ask you guys one day, could I come down and train with you guys or something like that? Is that something that I could be able to do, or maybe other people, or how would that work?
There's plenty of online teachers.
Okay.
Morgan has a business with that. There's a myriad of people out there. You can jump on the Facebook group, do your research. I always personally, I always recommend the originals if you can.
Okay.
They're not going to be around forever. We just lost Ed. I was grateful to him for taking him in and allowing, me to understand how he saw things, what he saw. Not only that, but like a lot of people didn't really know Ed enough to see him. He's a great guy. He's a sweetheart. There's an Ed that's on the socials or on the radio shows or on the television shows. And then there's an Ed that's a grandfather. It's a father to a couple of amazing children. Go see the originals if you can. Right now, I'm trying to convince Morgan and a few of the other guys that we've worked with to go to the Monroe Institute. And while I'm there, I plan on spending a week or two with Joe McMonagle, who in himself is an amazing story. If you guys haven't read his books or seen him on the Sean Ryan show or on other different ones, sorry to name drop if that's a problem, but no. He's out there. You can find him on YouTube, and hearing his story and how he developed it, even in his book, just the way he developed it, it was out of necessity. It was just plain saving his own skin in Vietnam. Well, some would argue that he had it beforehand, and I think he would say that too. But it really became a useful tool to him in Vietnam and the rest of his life. So I don't know. He's older. He's pushing 90, right? I think. I gotta tell you guys something. I'm going to Monroe in a month. Oh yeah,
yeah,
nice.
Or like
congratulations,
a little bit more than yeah. I've been freaking out about it. I'm so excited. So that is, I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to ask you what you think, and the fact that you guys want to go there, that really makes me excited. So yeah, that's coming up.
It's a part of my personal quest to find out what the hell's really going on, and I feel that if you haven't done enough to try and get out of your skin and go look around and see what's going on, like even if it's just a mental ERV projection sort of thing, I'm fine with that too. But essentially, for those who don't know, it's essentially, if I'm not mistaken, it's a float tank type experience. I looked into it last year before I went and saw Paul Smith, and I thought, well, maybe I'll go to Monroe if I can't go see Paul. Then I looked at the reservations and how long it took to get into the Monroe Institute. It was like another 6 or 9 months wait just to be able to get on the list to get in. And something I hope to do.
It's so crazy. Now, I want to jump to our next topic, which you guys talk about in that lengthy 6-hour video about different targets, and you talk about the data, as you mentioned earlier, right? A lot of the stuff you're getting reports, you're writing things down, and I think the importance as well, we want to touch on this, that you guys have a team. You guys aren't doing this independently. You're corroborating the data, which just straight up scientific method, good science, good analysis. You guys are doing your due diligence to make sure, hey, like, where are we seeing the intersections? Where are we seeing the hits? And I think that's so valuable to what you do, and just like being able to verify what you guys do. Now, I'd love to know, have there been any, and let's just leave it to Earth, because we're about to get into the deep stuff in a second, but let's talk about different Earth mysteries or different times in the history of Earth that you guys have remote viewed and been like, oh my God, we saw this and it blew us away. Is there anything that comes to mind for either of you?
Real quick before Morgan, or I come up with an answer. That's one thing we didn't hit earlier. When we work, we work with a team of at least 3 or 4 viewers, sometimes 5. You have a project manager, and you got 4 different remote viewers. Like, they don't know what they're working on, and they don't know what the other person is working on. And we find that there's a great advantage of having several different viewers all at once. And when we see it with future forecasters, we see it with other people, that you have 4 people who are blind to what they're working on. They're just going through their methodology. They're sitting at a desk writing down perceptions as they come in, and then once everyone's finished, we get together and we have like a 3 to 5 hour conversation. What do we all have? And when you've got 4 or 5 different people who've working the same target, blind to each other, and they're all saying the same thing or roughly the same thing, it is mind blowing. The first time that actually worked for me, I was just like, wow, I couldn't even explain at the time how I felt, because it's just one of those things that happen from time to time that refills the tank. Because, we've been at this now for 14, almost 15 years. And, you hit these barriers. Like, do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to keep going with this? And every time I get to that point, I always find myself either running into one of these type of sessions where it refills the gas tank, where it really just blows your socks off, that 4 people blind to each other and what they're working on are saying the same thing. And then on top of it,
and let me just let this sink in. If you're listening to this right now, let this sink in for a second. Dan and Morgan have been doing this for a while, but just understand what they're saying. 4 different people. Imagine sitting in a room or sitting in separate rooms, whatever, and you're psychically connecting to the ethereal, to a stream of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, and they're all independently viewing something without any knowledge of that. It's double blind, and they're all seeing and describing the same thing. Like, just imagine if that happened with you and 3 other people or 3 other colleagues, how blown away you would be by experiencing this. So I just want to put that in perspective. Like, that is insane. That is mind blowing. So sorry, Dan, keep going.
And then I would also find myself sitting in the situations like, well, I don't know what else to do next. Well, I guess maybe I'll run a target. Blind target, just me on something I'm looking for me, just to see what I should do next, if that's one thing. And that's where some of the power of technical remote viewing comes into play. By the way we target things, we can start looking at ourselves. And that's where things start getting really interesting, is when you start asking questions about yourself. Sometimes, whether that's money, love, what should I do with my life, or what are my skill sets that, what's my optimum vocation or something like that. You're sitting at a crossroads. You're not quite, like, let's face it, at this point, a lot of those people that are in college degrees right now are getting their college degrees may not find a job anymore if AI truly goes to where they say it's going to go. And how many jobs are going to be out there? In some ways it's a blessing, because then you're free to open to do what you might want to do if you can afford to do so, unfortunately. But yeah, just every time I run to a spot, it's either I remote view more or something else happens, and I get inspired to go back to it again. So I think the original question was something along the lines of what blew our socks off. Mm-hmm. Morgan, what do you think about the origin of Genesis 1:1.
Can you share? What,
I mean,
what was
Oh
that?
yeah, we can share for sure. I just didn't know if you wanted to go there or not. Ultimately, somebody's going into a.
doesn't matter to me.
Ultimately, the result, the general story, and these are things that we're working on right now. We're hoping to, at some point, sometime soon, to eliminate the man hours by using AI to be able to get all these projects, this backlog of stuff that we have, at least into a short TikTok or into a short YouTube video or something along those lines. Plus, with data-driven reports, like the idea is to what we find at the end of these projects, right? So we have these projects, and we've worked. I don't. Me personally, I'm up over the 900 mark, almost 1,000 at this point. I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 together as a group. And that group, just like a band, you might lose a bass player, you might lose a drummer to whatever. But like we lose people, and then we get new ones that come in. We're lucky enough to have somebody else joining us here shortly. I don't want to name names or anything like that yet,
Sure.
but we have like 4 or 5 hour conversation about all this stuff, and we have to turn it into a transcript and try to feed it into an AI to create a summary, and then to create storyboards, then to create scripts, and then to create all this other stuff. And when it comes to articles, obviously those are like 3-4 months to write an article, just doing all the man hours ourselves. So we're hoping at some point real soon, in the next couple of months, to have something out there and start really putting out some of these topics. Topics like the Pareto principle, or again, Genesis 1:1. We didn't quite get a clear result on the Great Reset topical search, but that was some interesting stuff. But ultimately, the story, we get these metaphorical stories at the end of these 3 or 4 hour conversations. And the general idea when it comes to the origin of Genesis 1:1, and I'm not looking to cause any kind of religious outcry or anything like that, but ultimately it was a person in a cave talking to this robotic type kiosk. And the kiosk starts spitting out this information of Genesis 1:1, which I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but something like is first there was the word, and then there was light, or something like that. Mm-hmm. The origin of that particular text came from what we believe to be some sort of automated intelligence of some sort.
What? Wait, and then. So wait.
We don't have much detail about everything on this now. Now keep that in mind. But yeah.
Okay. Oh my God, this is wild. So this is okay. So that one really blew your socks off. That's
yeah,
so,
it did.
And how do you choose? How do you choose the targets? Is there things that you guys are have common interest for, or is there kind of a collective that you guys go to people that are following you and say, hey, what do you? Yeah, how do you guys choose targets?
Normally, it was just our own questions that start when we first started in 2012, 2013. Mm-hmm. Then it grew into a group of 4 or 5 people by the end of 2013. And at that point, we were just running what we call as a blind pool. So we would formalize our questions. Everyone had like 10 or 15 questions that they want answered. And then we would just put them into a random generator, and it would select the queue, would select the numbers, and it would just spit out the number, and it would print it out to formalize the queue. Then we'd take the numbers, the tasker would task us as a way to kind of keep double blind, and then we would run those. So a lot of these targets, a lot of my targets were personal stuff about what's going on with me, spiritual, mostly money, mate, or significant other, or trajectory, which is what we call is like, what's the best avenue in front of me should I choose in my life to go do something.
That's so cool that you can remote view yourself and extract all this information.
Yeah.
Now, I want to set the stage for what we're about to jump into next, because now we're getting deep, and this is why this topic is so absolutely important. Whether we're talking about remote viewing, also I kind of consider out of body experiences, astral projection, in that same lane of just having ultimate importance. And here's why. I want to preface it this way. I was starting to get into a lot of NDEs and understanding the nature of reality from that vantage point. In 2024, I was going through something traumatic for like that entire year. And that caused me to look at all this type of information. And first, you would say I was kind of going down a new agey type of path, where that was starting to blow me away. And I said, okay, they're all saying the same thing. It's peace and love. It's learning. It's a school. This is beautiful. And then so ultimately, a lot of the comings and goings on this planet or in this reality seemed essentially trivial, because really, ultimately, whether we acquire assets or lose things or whatever, it's all intent. It's all by design. Everything is planned out. And so we're pretty much doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing here on life. that relieved me of a lot of pressure at the time and just said, oh my gosh, okay, so we're all here with a preset design to some extent. And you could say like, yeah, there are negative things happening. They're suppressing information, suppressing energy technology, all the stuff that we've learned about in the world of conspiracies. They're terrible. They shouldn't be happening. But ultimately, when we leave this vessel, when we leave this body, everything is beautiful and everything just wraps together beautifully with a bow on top, and we're good. So, yes, things are very messed up and very problematic on this planet, but once we exit, everything makes sense, and that gave me a lot of comfort. Well, here's where things get interesting. Here's where things get very interesting, and this is why remote viewing and all these different means of accessing information is actually so important. And this is the things that I've learned in the last several months from starting this channel, which is that if you are saying, certainly there's manipulation, there's control systems in place on this planet, which I think at this point everybody's woken up to. Okay, there's not a single person that isn't like, at least depending on how deep you go, most people are at least saying, okay, like, yeah, now we got to be careful of even the news. I mean, when I was growing up, the news was just gospel, right? But I think a lot of people are waking up to this idea that there's manipulation here. But here's where it gets wild, and here's where it gets really, kind of not so happy, is that the idea that the manipulation and the entire system is not just about what's happening on this planet. Once we exit, we are still in the cycle. We are still in a closed box system that is potentially keeping us entrenched in this cycle of rebirth, cyclic existence, as they say in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And these means of accessing information is kind of the only way, as far as I know, to really get the full picture and understanding of what's going on. So this is why what we're about to talk about next is so absolutely important. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan. I've heard you guys in the videos talk about Loosh, talk about NDEs, and I'm just going to let you take it away. What have you seen with respect to the overarching system?
Before we get started, though, I do want to say one real quick thing. Yes. Morgan, if you want to jump in here and maybe address some of this, at least from your point of view. We don't have all the answers.
Okay.
First off. Second off, this is some pretty dark stuff. And it's one thing we forgot to talk about in our last show with Mav on Tailspin, is that this gets pretty dark. And we suggest that people take it and sit with it. And it takes a while. When we first started getting this information out, really right away in 2012, we didn't really know it until about 2015 when we started hitting other targets that we were actually been working on some of these tangential ideas since we started with the Ed course and then his forums back in the day. We hope that people work with qualified medical psychologists and psychiatrists. If you've got an issue with depression or other maladies, we suggest that you don't listen. Work through your stuff. It's one thing that is very common this day, is that everyone's walking around with some level of trauma. I have my own. I work on my own, but shadow still comes out in popular psychological vernacular. But just sit back and try not to take it too harsh, essentially. But
I also want to say too that Dan has done a really good job in the videos. Look, but I think you should take exactly what he said to heart. If this is not for you, or if you don't want to go down this rabbit hole, then you absolutely tune out. But what I love about the message, I feel like that Dan, if I think it's you that's generally the one that I've been hearing, that is, and look, I'm the same way in life. There's always a positive message. And I don't think it's by fabric. You're not like just manufacturing positivity, but there is positivity to be had in everything that you guys have been seeing and observing, which is empowering, which is about our sovereignty and all these. I just want to throw that out there. But anyways, could we jump back to, could we jump back to what Dan, would you be able to cover and kind of jump in on this topic?
The first thing I want to say after the disclaimer.
Yes.
Yeah. When we first started running into this stuff in what would have been 2015, we had a bad year. We hit the most significant remote viewing target. And then within a target or two, it was the topical search on moksha, which loosely translate the ability to escape the reincarnation cycle, if I'm not mistaken. And there were other ones on the what reality was, topical search on reality, and what reality really is. And then this was all in the matter of like 6 to 8 weeks, one summer, 2015, 2016. And we had a bad time, man. I wouldn't say depressed, but like it blows apart your worldview, your world paradigm. And we can add the lunar wave if we'll get to that here in a second. It blows you apart. But the one thing, and it kind of happened to me when I first started remote viewing, I was not the most psychologically balanced person. It tends to kind of balance you out a little bit, help you understand what's going on up there. So it was a rough couple of months, and it took us a long time to get over the data. The one thing I do want to add here before we start talking about these sorts of things is we were working on the lunar wave. And if nobody's aware of what the lunar wave is, the original uploader, his YouTube channel is Crow777. He's looking at the sun these days. I haven't really followed him too closely in the last couple of years. So you're looking for something about 2015 in YouTube from his channel, where he's got plenty of them, in which he's got a telescope hooked up to a digital camera, and he's literally seeing this optical wave around the curvature of the moon. And that was a target that somebody had put into our pool. And first of all, it's real. It knocked my socks off when I saw that it was real. And ultimately, the result of that particular session was the wave is real, and what it's doing is creating an image barrier, not only for us on the Earth looking at the moon, but the moon looking back at Earth as well. We had
just to clarify. So you're saying there's a wave, maybe of energy or of some frequency being emitted from the moon?
The data, there is an atmosphere to our moon. I believe it's mostly sodium and xenon, I believe, from what we looked at post-session analysis and trying to find other feedback for that particular session. Because usually when you get done, you're trying to find feedback so that you can be confident in your results. And in that particular session, it was describing this wave as a refresh for this this field or this vision or this I don't want to say holograph because it's going to lead to a whole lot of different conversations, but ultimately it prevents somebody on the moon from seeing the Earth as it truly is, and it prevents people on the Earth from truly seeing what the moon as it truly is. Now, we had dust, we had craters, but we also had civilization underneath a broken bubble, and we don't have any kind of parallax for time, so we don't know how long ago this was, this civilization that was there, but at the time, yes, this thing is real. Now, going through that, and the bright spot that I wanted to highlight here is we were far into this. We were probably 50 to probably 120 minutes worth. Oh, no, not 50 minutes. About 120 minutes worth of work. After about 45 minutes in our methodology is when you get the point where in which you can stand on your foundation that you've laid as a remote viewer to be able to reach out for other things, to try to mentally go out and query and bring back what we call richer data. And at this point, we're in what we'll call stage 6, and we're sketching. And what I'm sketching was two lovers that were in a jail cell, essentially. And outside of this jail cell is this cop sort of thing, beating on his baton, looking at the two people. There's cameras and there's other people watching what's going on inside this cage. Okay. And ultimately, what it showed was two people were engrossed in each other so much that they didn't even notice the cage. There were two people that were so involved with each other that they didn't notice that there were people on the outside looking in. And at one point during the analysis, the project manager asked me, he's like, well, who's truly in control here? And he had me poke around the page, and he asked me the question. And ultimately, I told him it's the people inside the cage. Ultimately, we do have control here. As we will find out probably somewhere down the line, whether it's this call or maybe perhaps an addendum later that we might do, ultimately, we have the power to have the control here. Everything that's going on that we're about to go through, we are the source of the power, what happens, we can choose. Ultimately, choice. And we'll get into free will and destiny here in a little while too. But we have the power. They do not. So keep that in mind when we start to go through this stuff.
100%. And I've been like, again, this is not something that you guys have told me, but this is the conclusion that I've been coming to the more that I've dove into all this material, and the more that I think about, if there's so much manipulation and so much happening to keep us, let's say, entrapped in this system, well, we must be pretty darn powerful. There must be something pretty special about that. So that resonates with me so much, so much.
You know, I know that I could hear the people in the comments already. Just calm down. We'll get to it. Everything's going to be fine. At worst, we'll be releasing stuff as soon as we can get it together. I don't really need, but people should understand that, you know, there's not a whole lot of money in remote viewing. A lot of the people, like, I can't make a living doing it. I work for a living, and so does Morgan, and so does everyone else that we work with. There are some people who are fortunate enough out there to have a model with the YouTubes, and that seems to work out well for them. But anyway, so I guess what he was trying to do is, like, let's go kind of in an order. So when we were first training on the forums, you know, usually as soon as you get done with the DVD set is when they start trying to push your but your skills a little bit higher. And one of the projects is what we call Project Coffee, which was probably about summer of 2013, somewhere in that neighborhood. And ultimately, the result of Project Coffee, its Q, was the origin of Homo sapiens sapiens, which is our current meat suit. And if you would believe anything with anthropological history and way that archaeologists describe our current history, and I know there's a whole question about resets and, you know, missing time with certain civilizations, and some people say there was 1,000 years added or taken away or whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, this meat suit, from what we know, is about 250,000 years old. So from what we know, 250,000 years ago, there was, I don't want to say this, there was a genetic manipulation, which involved a camouflaged center of others, let's just say. And they basically kidnapped a bunch of former hominids and started doing experiments with them. And over the course of time, a new human hit the scene. You can look at our website, and we have a write-up on that. I think it's the origin of modern man, I believe, is the article. Go through and read it. We have more statistics, like, you know, this particular skeletal remains that was found in this particular area with this, you know, with these attributes at this particular area. But ultimately, there was a new human on the scene, a new Homo sapien.
And
I believe
who kidnapped these hominids, and who did this?
At that point, it's not very clear. We don't start working on these guys. We don't start seeing these guys in full detail until basically the next project. Not really full detail, because we don't know much about them in general, because we're just, at this point, as we're working, we're just hitting targets. We're just asking questions and hitting targets. We don't get to putting all this stuff together until like 2016, 2017, 2018. Then we start hitting more of it in 2020. So, like, this stuff takes time because of the blind protocol. We need to run other targets. And then on top of that, we need to run other calibration targets to make sure that we're accurate. And other subject matters come up, optimum health trajectories for other people, most significant false beliefs, gold targets. That's a whole nother ball of wax that one of our associates and I are thinking about putting something together about how we're using remote viewing to try and find gold targets all throughout the United States and other countries. But anyway, so we get to the point where we see that there's genetic manipulation is the total answer, really. There's details around that concept, but that's ultimately the answer from Project Coffee, is that there was genetic manipulation to create a new version of human meat suit, so to speak. And we moved from Project Coffee into the most significant remote viewing target at that point. And that was about a year or two later, I think, at that point. And that's when we start getting this idea that the most significant remote viewing target is the light trap, that there are souls that are coming off of these dead, dying things that are being put into a box, and that this light is associated with this box. Okay, it's a little strange, but we all came to the same consensus at the end of this call, that the light at the end of death, at least from what we think as humans, is a trap. Now, I believe Joe McMonagle has worked something on the light at one point, and he kind of, in his extended remote viewing sort of way, or it's hard to say what he does exactly, and I don't want to get into technical details, but basically he moved to the side and saw that there was an edge to this light and that there was something on the side of it was projecting the light. There's other examples in history and in media. John Lear in the Coast to Coast AM shows described this situation about not going into the light. It's present in a lot of different places. We're not the only people that have purveyors of this information. It's many spots.
Yes.
You look at the ancient Vedic culture, they talk about this reincarnation situation in the light. Other civilizations do too. You've done more work and read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I have not.
Yes.
Egyptian Book of the Dead. I would imagine there's something involved there as well. Then you look at the Gnostics and their whole process of trying to get out of this trap. It's very complex in their vernacular.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that, we are not the purveyors of this information. We're confirming for remote viewing evidence that these other historical civilizations and other people have talked about this. Now, of course, it's lost to time. It's being destroyed in wars or in great fires of great cities and that kind of stuff. And, civilization reset, but it's there. And that's what we get out of the most significant remote viewing target. And then we run into the topical search of moksha, the term moksha. A topical search for us is when we don't know what we're asking. We're just doing a probe. Okay, what is this? What is this concept? And each individual viewer, based on their own education, their own experience, and their own general lexicon of knowledge, will put out a metaphorical story generally by the time they do a session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions. The idea is to get it in the first session, but sometimes these things are very large, these concepts, and it requires multiple projects. And the moksha idea was to just don't go in the light, bro. Don't go in the light.
And when you say don't go in the light, like where do you go? Do you just go the opposite direction, or what is that? What is that?
We're
like?
kind of at that point now. We're trying to map out the idea of what's going on. I can talk about my particular session from about 2022 on, I'm trying to remember if it was what is harvested from a soul. I don't think that's correct. What happens if you choose to not go into the light? And I think I talked about this a little bit in the Doom Room at some point.
You did.
For me, the ideal, like, I don't want to say this, my ideal life right now and my conscious awareness of what I would like and what I would want is just a cabin in the woods with a dog. And that's ultimately what came out. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone's just going to go by themselves. We can look to other people's works. Robert Monroe talks about it a little bit in which he's traveling on with his buddy that he doesn't know the name for, which winds up being his future spiritual self helping him out in the present sort of thing. And they go and they visit a friend who's living with a significant other in this reality. And they're in the woods by themselves, away from people, just enjoying their time and being themselves. Also in that session, excuse me, the light, the moment at which me personally am looking at the light, first I recognize it, right? The first option was I recognize this light and I know what it is, and I choose not to go into it. And then nothing really else data-wise comes out at that point. The second one was as I was heading towards the light, there's warning signs along the sides here. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And the third option that I had at the time was just sitting in a meditative, lotus pose, just meditating, not really attached to the light, not really concerned about the light, just being. And it's hard to say how big this control structure is. Is it just this planet? Is it the entire solar system? Is it the entire galaxy? Is it our branches of that string of super clusters? Is it the entire universe? I don't think so, but we don't have definitive information just yet.
And real quick, going back
Go
to this idea of, you said avoiding the light, and then maybe in that example going to a cabin or being with your higher spiritual self, or different ideas like this. Am I understanding this right, that if you don't go into the light, the main idea is it's almost like choose your own adventure. You get to choose and dictate. Would you describe it that way?
In some respects, yes. We've been working on this model, and I'd have to pull it up. I don't know. I don't have it. We did put it in the Doom Room recording. You might see it if you really zoom in on it. It's not the best recording in the world. The audio was good, but everything else was. At some point, we do have this general idea of model of we're living in a reality, and this is the way I kind of describe it: is that it's very much like we're in a park watching a movie, right? We're in this park. Let's call it base reality. And then you're watching something on the screen. And what's going on is there's some sort of projecting that's overlapping this scene that we're sitting at, and we're participating in it. I liken it to I don't want to use dimension, or I don't know which word to use, density, dimension, or whatever else. Mm-hmm. But it seems as if everything that's going on here in this dimension, the third dimension, is being broadcast or being projected from a different dimension. And we're just living in the shadow of that world. We think at this point that world is the base reality, base world, and what's going on here in this quote unquote simulation. And I don't really like the word simulation. It's the best word we have. It's the best concept that we have for what's going on.
Actually, I would debate that, and I hope
that's fine.
Hear me now.
We can have that. Yeah,
I would say a better word actually is virtual reality.
Okay.
And fair possibly enough. Even better than that is dream.
Okay.
Dream is, in my opinion, based on the sum of the data available to us now. I'm quite certain of this, that dream is the best analogy that we can come up with. It kind of covers all bases, and I think it covers them most accurately. A virtual reality constructed in a dream state is, for all intents and purposes, a simulation. Now might be as good a time as anything to mention the concept of basically the Matrix kind of model. The people in jars, the brains in jars. Look, and this is where it gets really dark and disturbing. But the fact of the matter is, this precise imagery comes up repeatedly. I've tasked
and Morgan, by the way, two things. One, your audio sounding great now, so it's good. So we're back. But the second thing, when you're talking about the people in jars, you're talking about the projection. Are you talking about base reality?
Yes, base reality. Okay. Yes. And this is where the idea of, we've kind of conversationally, excuse me, we've used the term prison planet before, but that's not really accurate. I think prison reality is much more accurate. And what our data basically tells us is that there are a bunch of us, people, the genetically engineered hominids of Earth, Terra, base reality, who were imprisoned and subjected to pretty horrendous experiments. And at least one branch of the experiment is effectively running this, and here I will use the term simulation. But how is it a simulation? Well, it's a simulation in that these people are basically placed in some form of stasis or coma, and they're basically in a tank. Like, visualize the Matrix pods, or the what are they called? The healing tanks from Star Wars. You're suspended in this fluid with a breathing apparatus, and in this case, something akin to like a Neuralink, basically. So you're all wired together, and there is a technological component that is kind of, I think, regulating the dream, the shared dream. And that's basically what we're looking at here. We're inside a shared dream. The real physical us is in a suspended in some fluid somewhere. That as ridiculous as that sounds, yeah, trust me, I know. But the data brings this back repeatedly, and I mean, I'm telling you, I've tasked this to people with the hope of them actually disproving it. Like, I want to see something else, right? And
Yes.
invariably, they come back with the same imagery every time, that there is this subterranean, literally under the ground, basically the basement of this large structure. And in this basement, there is where these experiments are being conducted.
And
And
is this data, by the way, outside of your team, that other teams or other remote viewers that you've conversed with are also seeing roughly the same thing?
I don't know. I think to some extent, but to be fair, I purposefully keep other public remote viewing groups basically at arm's length, and it's nothing personal. I just I don't. And I don't mean this in a rude way, but I don't really care what they're doing.
Got it. Okay.
I don't want to be influenced by them.
Sure.
I see, of course, this kind of stuff, like other remote viewing groups, their work comes across my feed. I see it, but I don't actively follow it. The trouble is, what I have seen is that some people who have come across this data and adjacent data have either, at some point, they've either decided that no, their work was wrong, at least in that case, or that any number of excuses, but they effectively denounce their own work. I've seen that. I think it's too much for some people. I will say there are certainly people in the RV community that won't even entertain the possibility that this is real. That what we're talking about is real. They say, no, this cannot be a prison, because after all, we have free will, and look at the beauty in the world around you. How could that possibly be the case? Well, sure. If that's the attitude, then what we're saying never could be possible. So, I mean, at that point, what's really the sense in taking it any further than that?
And I want to jump in here, because when I first heard this, and when I first heard you guys talking about it, it put a pit in my stomach. It's not pleasant to hear. I don't want it to be legitimate, but obviously on this journey that I'm on right now, open-mindedness is, I think, paramount. I have to just listen to what people are doing, especially people like you guys that are credentialed and have this great scientific system. And so unfortunately, it is what it is. And like you said, hey, maybe it's not the case, but let's at least investigate it. Let's not shut our eyes to it. Now, I know you guys don't have all the answers, but do you guys have a theory? And let's go back to Loosh a little bit. Loosh, as well as this base reality, if indeed we are in this dream state, as you put it, Morgan, or if you guys want to call it a simulation, I think as Dan was saying is the best word kind of he can come up with. Why is this happening? And if you guys could also, I'd love to know if you guys could kind of start by explaining. We hear this term Loosh. I've talked about it many times on the channel, but if you guys could explain Loosh and how it fits into the potential why of this, why the system exists.
The very first thing I got to say about Loosh is that Bob Monroe's idea of Loosh, it seemed to evolve. Okay, as he continued doing further work. So the kind of the general, or the kind of the popular idea is that Loosh is like negative energy generated out of fear and sadness and just general negativity. There's a whole lot more to it than that, at least according to Monroe, and he coined the term Loosh. Okay, so in all fairness to him, he would not agree with that oversimplified definition.
Okay.
Now that said, too, I'm not a Bob Monroe expert. I have his books. I've read them like a long time ago. I did the Home Study Gateway program. But I kind of left all that stuff behind, and just in favor of pursuing technical remote viewing, with 100% of my effort and attention. So that said, if we're using the word loosh conversationally, I just really want to be clear about that, because people have complained before that you're not using the term loosh correctly, and it's like, yeah, I know that, but using such a complex term conversationally, it's kind of difficult sometimes. So with that caveat, okay, the concept of loosh, I mean, when we were really kind of stepping back and taking that 30,000 foot view of the projects that we've worked over the years, and kind of started really, deciding where there were threads to connect and where there weren't, we did often use the term loosh kind of casually, just to describe what we were talking about in terms of the energy harvest component of this whole kind of system. But I think more accurately, honestly, it would be just, it sounds kind of cartoonish, but I guess in my own personal vocabulary, I call it soul power. And it's kind of a half joking kind of a thing, but it literally, like, again, terminology and putting word labels on some of these ideas is really difficult. But what I'm talking about is, whether you think of it as soul, spirit, essence, or that, spark, just that spark that is uniquely you, that's the being part, of the human being, the potentially eternal bit of the way that I think of it. And again, this is based on my work. You kind of asked about it before, but that spark or I don't know.
Some might call it the divine spark, maybe in Gnosticism, but effectively, sure, our energy that is within us, that I think many of us believe is indeed internal and way more powerful than maybe we realize. That's kind of what you're saying?
Yes, and that ultimately is, I think what it really comes down to is what we were conversationally calling loosh is actually the harvest and I guess probably the best word is exploitation of that divine spark or soul or spirit or essence or whatever. And that's what it is, because that's the ultimate, as far as I can see, that's the ultimate power source. And I watched one of your videos, and you kind of paused on that idea, what maybe we really don't understand what is energy, what is power. And I think that's exactly correct. We have, so many of our questions, if you really take a step back, think about the question you're asking. So many times it's very much framed in a here and now humanistic understanding of things, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking the royal you, the royal we. But we have a very limited understanding, and we have our technology follows very particular principles of physics, but I don't think it's even debatable at this point that we do not have a complete understanding of physics. No, not even close. Scientific discoveries and major breakthroughs happen all the time. We don't know how consciousness works. If I seem to remember, just a year or so ago, they almost doubled their estimated projected age of the universe. So, the point is that things that are stated as known fact aren't necessarily so. So when it comes to things like energy, we have certain ideas of what energy is and what it means and how it might be harnessed to operate. But the fact of the matter is, there are other possibilities. You know,
I want to. Oh yeah.
No, sorry, man. No, go ahead. Thanks.
I just want to ask a quick question on that point. Is it possible? And I know you guys don't have all the answers, right? Sometimes I feel like I don't want you to. I'm just so fascinated to finally get you guys on an interview because I do have a lot of questions, but I'm not trying to put pressure. I hope you don't think I'm trying to put pressure on you to come up with all these answers to these massive questions. But
no, not at all.
Is there anything that you guys have seen in the data to potentially imply, right? We're talking about energy, loosh, and the power of the eternal spirit, and that being the objective of this whole system. So obviously we must have a heck of a lot of power if this whole system is built for us and possibly being powered by us. Is it possible that we are powering everything and we are that powerful, and that loosh, or this idea of the energy G that is being emitted, is potentially behind all the energy in the universe, 0 point energy, and all of the above?
It's a good question.
Well, I mean, I have a short answer for that, and that is that I believe, and this again is based on my own work on this subject, is that I use the term primordial thought, that was a term that was suggested to me. But my work basically says that the origin point of reality itself was, and again, we're talking so far outside of human understanding that I'm doing the best I can. But well, I described it as like just the flash, like the first thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, here's another way to think about it. You know, the universe couldn't exist until there was conscious awareness to experience it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That sort of thing. And again, I'm doing the best I can. But
I think I see what, but if you say it like that, it's when you frame it that way, the universe cannot exist until there's a thought to experience it or a consciousness to experience it. That kind of frames it in that way, that it is the source of everything. Effectively would be that conscious energy or that thought energy. Is that, am I right?
Oh, I think quite literally.
Okay.
Not just metaphorically, but literally, yes.
Yeah, there's many schools of thought out there that say that everything is consciousness. We are everything, and everything is us. Like we're all connected. To get back to the idea of the loosh situation, I think why my associate there has an issue using, because we never really use the word loosh in any of our data. That's what it looks like. It walks like a duck. It talks like a duck. It might be a duck. It seems, and I just want to hit this real quick, that over the course of the work and the data, is that it appears as if there are cycles of what's going on. It seems as if that first genetic manipulation may not have been the first. It may have been more before that, maybe more after that. But it seems as if that we are a snapshot currently in an evolution towards something that doesn't look like human. Ultimately, the viewer in the original, which one was that? It might be the humans intelligent design, but ultimately the idea is that there's these group of people that are being experimented on and genetically manipulated in such a way to ultimately result in like that flame or that divine spark in a tank of water, and being able to do things to the water to make the spark give off the energy or radiate its essence or whatever.
Basically, you're saying make it easier to extract energy.
Yeah. And you wouldn't have to use as much, make it more efficient. And it seems as if the meat suit's being designed more and more towards the idea that whatever the spark is that's in the meat suit radiates out even more. And the more that you develop the meat suit over time, or time cycles, or civilization cycles, that ultimately they're going to the point where they don't need the meat suit anymore. They just have these sparks in tanks that they can, experiment with to get the energy out of the spark.
What are they doing? What are they doing with this energy?
There's several different things. First, we know that it does power the simulation, or the dream, or whatever you want to call it. We don't know if there's other farms. We don't know if it's just this planet or it's the entire universe. We don't know exactly. We haven't had the data yet. my guess is that it's just the planet or the solar system. Whether you want to rely upon other people's works or not, it seems that they might fit if you're trying to get this large mosaic of everything that we know. Again, Tibetan, Egyptian, David Icke, or others. Robert Monroe and everything else, and trying to generate this overarching mosaic of what's going on. But ultimately, there are other things going on. I suspect, this is opinion, this is not supported 100% by the data. We can get the data together, we get a solid story from the data, and then you can stand on that data and say, okay, with reason, what else are they doing? And it seems as if not only are they cycling through the meat suit, but they're cycling through each iteration produces different technologies. The Egyptian technologies, or maybe perhaps the Vedics had their own technologies where we're talking about Vimanas or something else like that, or any, Atlantean, if there is enough truth to that, and any other civilizations. It seems like through these cycles, they're not only are they getting energy, but they're also getting technology. It seems as there's information that they're pulling from these large, whether it's metadata, I can't really say for sure, but the idea is that information about the culture itself, they're getting other technologies, other philosophies, other thoughts, and right at the end, normally, as I understand it, and the way I see the data, and the way I personally have my opinion about what's going on, is that they're drawing the energy. They changed the meat suit just before, and maybe at some point in the future, after I get a chance to really go through the data from the Bond of the Covenant in the Wilderness of the People. Ed spoke about this a couple of times on a couple of his later shows with with Art Bell, in that it seems as if there's these groups of people that are stashed away as of like a genetic reserve, so that if they make a mistake in the generating of the new meat suit, they still have the old stuff, which doesn't seem to quite equate too much with if they're masters of reality and they control the simulation. Like, why would you need to do that? That's not known at this point. But we've got energy, meat suit change, cultural and information, and it seems as if they're getting technology out of it as well.
So
hit the reset button. Go ahead.
I see. Okay, and then to reset to maybe like
and start over again and do it all over again with a new meat suit.
Would this be kind of akin to something like this, just so we can all wrap our heads around this? And they're getting technology, I assume you're saying, for the purpose that they're implementing in base reality. So would this be kind of like somebody saying, hey, I want to understand how to send a rocket to the moon. We haven't figured that out yet. All right, let's create a computer simulation. Let's run it in the simulation and see what happens there. And then we can put this like that, right?
Yep, 100%. That's my thought. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay.
I don't know what else to go from there, other than there's a potential that there's many other simulations going at the same time. Sure. To not only have, the eternal now, right, but maybe different other simulations that are going on parallel, where in which maybe perhaps something else is going on, whether that's, different dimensions or different frequencies of existence, if you want to call it that. It gets a little convoluted, and it definitely gets confusing at times. But big overarching view, that's what I believe is going on.
Now let's take this to another point that you guys had mentioned in one of the in that lengthy video. So that is the point, and it definitely feels nefarious, because it feels like with all the manipulation and the negativity, they're doing this kind of in a way you could say, obviously maybe free will laws apply, but we're being somewhat like led astray by participating in the system. And you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned that the controllers of the system, whether they're within here in base reality or whatnot, they're degrading, they're downgrading, or they're almost like, it sounded like they're withering away because of these negative things that they're doing to us. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What have you guys seen in terms of this degradation?
Not a whole lot of data there.
Okay.
It's mostly one or two viewers with a couple of data points, and that's about it. It would require a whole new project, 5 people working about anywhere between 5 and 15 hours to get the base data analyzed, and then another 5 hours together to talk about it, and then another however long it takes to kind of get everything sussed out of it. And then you got to sit on it a while. And then you've got to be sure and, double check your hypotheses with the data. It seems as if they are degrading in some form or fashion. It's costing them something. We don't know what that is. We don't know how fast that is. We wish it was a lot faster. But the one thing I would say about all this that you just kind of elucidated is that ultimately it's almost like a legal fine print trickery to get you to accept to doing this. Again, the false light. It's you moved into the light. Is it your own fault? I mean, you're not of the greatest of conditions when you're passing over. It can be very traumatic for a lot of people. I'm sure I've died thousands of times, but I don't remember them.
Right.
At least not yet. I'm hoping to one day. It would be nice to be able to get some of the regression stuff that people talk about. But you're in a very confused state. My suggestion is to just stop, calm yourself down, realize what's going on, and then try to remember. There is some hints towards how to go about doing that beforehand, before the crossover. Robert Monroe talks about some of this stuff in, I don't know if it's Ultimate Journeys or if it's his second book, Bar Journeys. But making an educated decision at that point. And as we understand it today, there are warning signs. Don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. But there's also things that are trying to manipulate you into going. Visions of dead relatives. Warm, fuzzy feeling. It's already starting to pull you in.
Religious figures.
Yeah, religious figures. Other sorts of things, and
sure.
A lot of that information is not in my purview. It's when I just talked to some other people like yourself who's done a fair amount of work into NDEs and those sorts of things. But ultimately, the idea is to stop and maintain your sovereignty and be very careful about what you choose to do next, essentially.
It's interesting too, because I remember the way that it was described in Journey of Souls or other books is that when you pass on, right, those religious figures or those projections are there for your benefit to make you feel comfortable. And I remember buying into that narrative initially, but then the more I think about it, it's like, you don't need to comfort me. I don't want to be comforted. I want to know the truth. So don't give me a manipulation or something false, right? And then once you look at it from that vantage point, the entire idea of the foundation of a lot of these NDEs, no, it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's for your benefit. No, it kind of falls apart because who wants more manipulation to get lulled into a sense of false comfort? That's really not what we want. Now, you also touched upon something else. I'd love to dive into this. I might be biting off more than I can chew here, but you mentioned this idea of, okay, we accept going into the light. That is implicitly or explicitly agreeing or signing on the dotted line, accepting a contract of sorts, which begs the question of, do we have free will? Which I think we do. I mean, I'm still learning and everything like this, but I believe it seems that this is a universal law that is described by everybody that exists, and that is the foundation of effectively existence. So the only way we can be in this existence is we must accept. But if we don't, we thereby have the means to exit. Can you tell me, what have you guys learned about free will and the law of free will?
Morgan, I could jump in here after. You might want to make a comment or two, and then I'll.
Yeah, that's definitely more Dan's kind of territory. But the short answer is, I think there's actually kind of a common misconception about what free will originally meant, compared to, we kind of tend to think of it in terms of, I have the ability to choose to do literally anything that I want. I could choose to go left, I could choose to go right, I could choose to go up, I could choose to go down, forward, backwards, anywhere in between. I can choose, and there is no such thing as predetermination. That's the common, I believe, misconception of free will. I think the original concept of free will was closer to, and I mean, don't quote me on this, but it was closer to something like, you have free will to choose God or to choose to turn away from God. That doesn't say anything about what's going to happen in your life, right? You may, and certainly it does feel that we can choose to turn left or to turn right, to do this or not to do this. but I'm not necessarily sure that was the maybe the more ancient kind of conception of free will. I think that's a more modern thing. And I'll just kind of preface what Dan's going to say with that. So, Dan.
Yeah. So we looked at free will. We looked at, we looked at the word destiny, and then it kind of, I wouldn't say devolved. It more or less got more complex towards we finished the project. I'm also going to kind of move into our topical search on reality and what reality is. It seems as if you're reality-wise, just looking at the word reality, your own reality is like a bubble around you that you've got somewhat control in. You've got your own thoughts, you've got your own choices, you've got your own things. But ultimately, that bubble is in a track or on a road, and there are inflection points where you can choose where it goes. But ultimately, it's like and this is quoting another remote viewer that worked with us in the past. It was a very apt metaphor. But essentially, you're on a roller coaster ride. You can, like the ones that hang down from above your head, and you're sitting in a seat. You can move your arms, you can move your legs, but ultimately, you're going where that roller coaster is going. Now, that's the idea of reality.
Okay.
The general concept of reality. Now, when we talk about navigating inside that reality, we start looking towards free will, and we're looking forward to destiny. Now, it is my opinion, based on data and then thinking about it a fair amount afterwards, that ultimately they're the same thing, destiny and free will. Now, I would probably caveat that with the only difference is time. Okay. We're living in it, right? Or at least we're perceived to living in the eternal now, or whether it's a linear thing or a corkscrew across whatever, however you want to call it, that it's malleable, of course, according to the newest science that's been published on that. But ultimately, I feel that in time, it seems like free will. When you're outside of time, it is destiny. Now, I know that doesn't really give you a whole lot of answers there. But what we looked at, the idea of destiny, it seems as if there was like an autopilot road or choice. White picket fence, house, husband, wife, or whatever that looks like now in 2026, 2.5 kids, cat, dog. That's like the autopilot, for at least in this culture, in this society, and doing what everyone else is doing. But then there's also this idea of going off and following your passion, your will, the things that excite you, the things that you love. But that's, and really they're kind of the same thing, because you're making those choices. And I keep coming back to the idea of time, that free will and destiny are both one and the same, depending on where you're at versus your view of either in time or outside of time. And it's hard to kind of grasp at sometimes. And the more and more I think about it, the more and more I solidify on that general idea. However, you've gone through your awakening, so to speak, and you've got your spiritual path or life path, or however you want to describe it. And other things outside of remote viewing have been happening to me over the last several years. Some very negative things, but also some very negative things that have woken me up to things that exist, that have power, that should be pay attention to. And I guess what I'm getting at is, like, you've got this destiny, you have this idea of free will, but there's also this spiritual path that we seem to be on. Whether you call that, Brahma, whether you call that God, whether you call that universe in spiritual tense, it seemed that there's some aspect to it. So it kind of lends to the same ideas that the two lovers are in the cage and people are watching, and they don't seem to have control. But in my remote viewing data, in my own experience, that they do have that, because they have choice. They don't have to be there. And getting out of that, it comes down to choice again.
Okay,
it's really confusing.
It is confusing, and I want to try and unpack it, because I'm wondering if other people might, because I'm trying to make sense of it. So let's get back in there. So you said free will within time, it looks like free will, and then when you step out of time, it's destiny. And you kind of said they're one and the same, which that is kind of breaking my brain when you're saying free will and destiny. And I'll tell you why. One of the things that I actually recently was thinking about is perhaps this idea of destiny is potentially another. Now, I'm not looking at data or anything. This is just my own reasoning. But I started to think, when you look at it from the vantage point of NDEs, or not even NDEs, but the Journey of Souls, that book where they talk about the life planning stage, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. It's going to be all planned out. I started to think, well, what if that's a manipulation? What if that is the implantation of ideas or different things that are going to happen in your life, mile markers that make you have those mile markers? It makes me think of the movie The Matrix, where she says, "Oh, don't worry about the vase," and then he knocks it over, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." So I said, "Don't worry about it." But what the real thing is, would you have broken it if I didn't say anything? So it started to get me into that. Exactly. So coming back to this idea of free will and destiny, when you say we're on the roller coaster, you believe that overall that ride is predetermined. But is that predetermined like 90%, or is it 100%? Whereas, like, if we wiggle enough and go crazy enough, we can completely redirect the trajectory.
I don't have any remote viewing data on that. And personal opinion, that's a big question, man. It's definitely worthy of a target.
Something intrinsically in me believes, and I have nothing to back this up, and maybe it's wishful thinking. I just think that, I just believe, especially with everything we've been talking about the manipulation employed to keep us here, the fact that we might be running the whole system, the fact that we have this eternal power in us, that's where my mind sits right now, that we can steer the ship any which way we want. And the roller coaster ride is completely malleable. But that being said, I have no data to support that. That is just some internal feeling, and it could very well be coerced or whatever by wishful thinking. So
we're not running it; we're powering it, and it's.
Sure.
And Morgan can speak to this a little bit more than I can. That it is a natural process, the reincarnation cycle, and what's going on here, that's being corrupted in a legally small print sort of way. Oh, Morgan, you want to jump in on this?
Let's talk about this. And because you guys mentioned this idea of the life review being hacked, but also the reincarnation cycle being hacked, like it's a natural process. Yeah, Morgan, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the cycle of things that is natural, and then how that's kind of being manipulated or modified here.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the exact word that I have used more than once in my session work on this stuff was mirror. This dream virtual simulation reality is a mirror version of base reality, as it were, in almost all ways. It reflects that reality, in that, the base reality Earth would largely resemble this one. Probably the inhabitants and infrastructure would be different. It's kind of hard to say about things like land masses and whatnot. But effectively, this is just the same as when you are in dreamland, when you're sleeping and dreaming, you inhabit, a mental version of the Earth, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing. And because that Earth largely reflects the reality that we know in our waking life. And I think it's very much the same in that regard. But I think in the bigger picture of things, the entire natural creation process that I kind of talked about earlier, with that primordial thought, that initial divine spark that created, conscious awareness in order for there to be a physical reality to inhabit and experience. Everything that has happened since the inception of this dream overlay reality is effectively mimicking that process. And it kind of goes back to the question of, energy and, what I was half jokingly calling soul power. because that's exactly what they are, the archons, or whatever we want to call them, the people that are running the experiment on us in base reality, are basically performing a technologically aided and corrupted version of the natural creation process.
Okay.
Does that make any sense to you? I mean,
Yeah.
like, insofar as something like that can make
Yeah,
sense.
I'm like what I'm trying. The way that I think maybe I or others can wrap our heads around it is that, I mean, I think this is coming, by the way. If we instead, what is maybe on the forefront is like an immersive virtual reality program or system being developed on this planet, and then maybe a subset of people being convinced to jump into it, saying this will provide you immortality, this will provide you escape from everything, and being coerced to go in there, and then once they go in there, those experiences being used to develop, like you said, technologies or harvest energy or different things like that. So I think effectively what you're saying is that's happening. They live in this existence. They were maybe promising people to go into this virtual simulation for various reasons, and then once they're in, they're kind of trapped, and then now it's being used against them. Is that kind of what you're saying?
More or less, yeah. And I could actually take the kind of line of thinking that you were going with there, and we could actually bring it a step closer to reality, because it's actually just come to my attention in recent weeks that there is a company based out of Australia. They currently have and are operating a server farm in Australia and a second one in Singapore. This company is called Cortical Labs, Cortical Labs. And their server farms are, in fact, you should look it up. Anyone listening should just look it up. But I'll describe briefly what it is. It's some sort of next gen computing system. It's basically like a cloud computing network. As far as I know, you, I, or anyone, if they have space available, could rent cloud space from them and work on their system. And what their system is a series of computer hardware devices interlinked, and the core processor of these is lab-grown brain cells.
Okay.
The hardware, it displays constant readout for temperature, humidity, oxygen levels, and that's because there's organic components that you need to keep alive in there. Okay, now that exists right now. Okay, so if you can extrapolate from that, two things. One, that's publicly admitted technology. Now, we all know that behind the scenes, and I'm throwing a number out there, but let's say nominally 30 years ahead of the curve technologically.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
What does that sort of technology look like in this, exponential technological curve that we're in right now? What does that look like 30 years from now? What does that look like 100 years from now? Just imagine. Really, just imagine. I think that's it. I think that that alone actually operates as a form of a proof of concept of actually the kind of things that we're talking about. Okay, and that's here now, public, right? That exists. So, extrapolate, project forward from that as you will. And the idea has been in fiction for some time now, and there's this idea that, and there's definitely something to it, that people, creative writers in particular, kind of enter a bit of a flow state when they're working. And flow state is more or less what you're entering when you're engaged in remote viewing. So I think what actually happens as often as not is things that people, the concept of predictive programming, right? Like, where they put ideas in, movies and TV shows to condition the public ahead of time to things that are coming down the pike, right?
Sure.
That's a thing. Sure it is. And there are what's his name, Chris Carter, the creator of the X-Files, has more or less said, yes, there were certain storylines that were directly suggested to him by like CIA liaisons and things. So that's a thing. That's real.
I believe it, but yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I totally believe it.
But I think as often as not, it's not actually, knowingly and directed predictive programming that we see when we see these ideas, years ahead of time in movies and TV shows and books and things. I think as often as not, what's happening is a particularly gifted and perceptive writer probably is picking up on these concepts, out of the ether, so to speak.
I've thought that as well.
In an undirected fashion. Like what we do from viewing is very structured, very intentional, and very systematic. They're doing it in a non-systematic way. So a lot of them probably don't know what they're doing. I think some do, because a lot of musicians will say this, and I always felt this when I was younger and I played in bands and things. A lot of musicians will tell you that, no, they're not really so much writing songs as they are finding songs that already exist. And it's very
like channeling almost in a weird way. And sure. There's not just musicians, by the way, mathematicians as well. So there's a book that I bought. I haven't read it yet, but I think it's called The Devil that or something like that. The demon, the demon. It has something to do with all of these scientists and mathematicians over generations that all claim to have been getting their ideas from an outside entity that has been basically, or some way like receiving this information as opposed to conjuring it up. So yeah, just to bolster what you're saying, I think
sure,
that's
or in dreams or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I know Morgan's got a good metaphor for martial arts as well. If you want to go over that one real quick, along the same thought line. Ultimately, we believe that the creative process has its roots in intuitive nature. In just about any art, whether math, science, martial artists at the highest level of martial artists, they can see, like they anticipate, and their body is working so much because it's been trained so well and it's been practiced so well that they know the throws that are coming already and already have moved to block it without even thinking. I think that's generally the metaphor you were talking about.
Yeah, right? Sometimes I think, yes, it's the same thing. You're in that flow state. And yes, martial artists, I think it can be demonstrated that in some cases, they'll start to block a move before it's even been telegraphed. If you watched it in ultra slow-mo replay, that sort of thing. Yes.
That's so cool.
So I guess back to what we were talking about with the virtual reality, the brains in jars and things. This sort of thing has been appearing in fiction for some time now. The idea of a virtual reality prison, where you can slap a set of VR goggles on somebody, and they can serve a life sentence in a very short period of time. Whether minutes, hours, days, whatever. The idea being that time is compressed within a virtual reality. So anyways, I guess that's all to say that a fairly comparatively basic, nonetheless extant prototype is here now. And so, just imagine going forward. I mean, are we in the early days of, if this big reset set us back to the Stone Age thing doesn't come along in the near, possibly immediate-ish future, not that I'm saying it will, where is that sort of technology going to go? Are we actually going to live in a world, let's say, I think it'd be safe to say, 10 years from now, could we see the introduction of that sort of prison?
Yeah. And I have a question too. Is there a possibility? Have you guys seen anything in the data that suggests that base reality is a virtual reality in another base reality, and so on it goes? Dan, I see you laughing. Is there anything that you've seen along those lines, or
there's a quote that Morpheus talks about or says in the end of the first Matrix, I believe, and it's a quote from King Nebuchadnezzar that's really questioning what level of the dream are we in.
Right.
You know, then you start looking at I can't remember, Chris Nolan's Inception as well. You know, how many different layers are there to this? You know, you hear these accounts of people who astrally project, or people who get out, or people who are, you know, I think it's even in Monroe's works where he gets out. It's like, you know, like how did you get out? How did you deal with that? Like, it's so difficult. How did you get out of that? Like, you know, it gives some level of credence, and I'm not saying a whole lot of credence to this idea of the school of Earth, or whatever you want to call about it. That most of the times it seems like a minnow trap. You know, the fish get in, but they have a very hard time getting out. And we've got some data on that as well. We'd have to refresh ourselves on the idea of, you know, the gist of the data was Soul comes along wanting to look at the Akashic records, but there's a under construction sign on the building, and there's an entity sitting out front saying, hey, you don't have to exit there, but you can just go right in there and experience it for yourself, sort of thing. How many different levels are there to the dream? I don't know. Can you use remote viewing enough to the point to determine how many there are? I don't know. All we know right now is where we're at right now is not what we've been told it is, and we've been tricked into it. You know, at some level, at base level idea, there was some level of deception and attack and or takeover. Now, is this before the Homo sapiens creation? I don't know. I'm looking at the site template right now, and again, there was a whole idea of negotiations and fine print, legalese being in the negotiation that get, you know, humanity tricked into becoming what we are right now. Where the story goes, I don't know. We will find out, I hope.
Now,
looking forward to that day.
Me too.
Really am.
And
really am.
I want to first of all say thank you guys. You guys have been on for 2 hours. This has been incredible. I cannot wait to see what people think about all the information we've discussed here. And I just got a couple more things. Well, really, one question from me, and just because we had a lot of people submit questions in the comments, I just love to do a little rapid fire at the end. These are like singular topical questions just to make sure to honor everybody that has been so awesome in the comments and so awesome as subscribers and the engagement and everything. So we're definitely going to do that at the very end. But here's my personal final question.
Can I jump in before you say that? I'm sorry to interrupt, but
jump in. Go for it.
On that exact topic, I actually wanted to make sure to say thanks to you and thanks to your subscribers, because they've been really great, man. Like you threw your kind of review recap of our video up, and that sent a whole bunch of people over, you know, that were curious about our work. And so I just want to say thanks to they've been really great, and they've been really really positive towards our work, which is like, that's kind of nice, because we get enough negativity and pushback, right? Like,
for the longest time,
thank you.
We've been knowing that it's something of the nature of where we're going reality-wise. Like we've thought that it had something to do with disclosure, and this is just all gut feeling. This is I believe that we've been trying to get this type of exposure for going on 10 years now. We always thought that it would kind of happen at some point. We had different ideas about how to put up our billboard sign or whatever, saying, "Hey guys, look at us," or something like that. And finding that group of people, we have not been able to find them. As you could see when you first started watching that video, a 6-hour long, almost 7-hour long video. Good on you. Good on anybody who spent the time to watch that video. We appreciate that. Anytime that we have the opportunity to talk about these sorts of things, we like to talk about them because it's our charge. Remote viewing wise, we've had lulls at times where we got incredibly inaccurate after running really hot, and we didn't know why. Project manager dreamt up a cue, we ran it, and basically what popped out was we weren't talking about what we had found. So our skills were being diminished, or we weren't given the information we wanted because we weren't talking about it. We always thought that it would kind of happen. We didn't know how it was going to happen. And the idea was to just get the information out. As you can see, this version of the website's been out since about 2020, and we don't get much views. it's not up to us how it gets out. And it seems as if you've come along and your group of subscribers, your group of viewers have made the first step in how it gets out. And we don't really have a control of how it gets out. I suspect fractally in some form or fashion, but thank you. We appreciate your viewers. We appreciate you. And let's keep at it.
You're very welcome. Let me say this. I want to say a couple things too. You're very welcome. And look, ultimately, what am I trying to do right now? I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I'm on a search for truth, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at all avenues because I think for where I'm at right now, we can see that there is endless amounts of deception that is happening on all levels. I think we're all aware of it at varying degrees, but it is happening and it is real. And what I want to say too is if sometimes things seem so out of the box that it's immediately causing you to have that super skeptical response. Obviously, be skeptical, ask questions. That's what I'm doing. We're all trying to learn, but don't let your conditioning take over. Don't remember, we're all on the same team, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you want to think Democrat, Republican, whatever these little splits in society exist. Ultimately, that's all a mirage, in my opinion. We're all on the same team, and we need to just listen to each other, use our discernment, let the walls down a little bit. Oh, I'm used to only information coming to me from the news or from my university or from my professor. Let's just listen. And the last thing I'll say is use your discernment. Some of our discernment maybe have been clouded by just the way this life is or the programming on this planet. Look at these guys. Just trust your instinct, trust your gut. And that's what's resonated with me when I listen to their tape. I'm using, or their video, use your discernment. I don't sense anything but true intentions in just terms of trying to relay information. And I like that it's what sometimes is an alarm bell for me is when people talk so definitively and as if error cannot creep in to what they're viewing. There's certain people that I've seen on YouTube. I don't even want to mention names right now. I've talked about in previous videos. It is what it is. But where they're like, this is what I've seen and this is what's happening. It's like, wait a minute, let's open some channels because for room for error, because there's other people saying they saw this, other people saying they saw that. We need to try and figure out what's going on as opposed to saying, I'm the messenger, I've got the answer, almost like this, that type of messiah complex that can take people over. And what I noticed with Intuitive Underground is that you guys don't operate like that, and that to me is an authentic way of operating. So I'm happy to share this. That's all I want to say. And guys, just open your mind, open your ears, and we're all in this together. We're not, hey, we're on this team, we're on that team, and let's fight and let's debate. Forget debate. Let's just listen and think and contemplate. So I just want to throw that out there as well. Now I want one big question, and then we're going to go to questions from the comments. I think it was you, Dan, that mentioned that, or maybe it was Morgan. I can't remember, that mentioned seeing the God mind or the primordial mind. And this is the one thing that stuck out to me. You saw, I think, perfect balance, meaning not all light and all positive, not all negative, obviously, but a perfect balance and a containment of the two. And that kind of made sense to me, even though I want to believe it's just all light and love, right? But that kind of made sense to me because where do the negative things come from? Where does it, right? If it all comes from one source, obviously it makes sense. So can you tell me, what did you see?
I can tell you that was from my session work. And it was exactly like in fact, it was the same session I was kind of touching on earlier, where I talked about that initial spark, the primordial thought, the conscious awareness that needs to be in order for there to be anything. It was exactly that. And I described, I sketched the way that I sketched it. And of course, I'm not saying this is what it literally looks like, but this is a diagrammatic sketch. And it's basically I drew it as just a kind of diamondy burst of light, but I sketched this kind of dashed line right down the middle. And I just had all these data points and just this overwhelming concept that this is a thought form. It's a burst of thought energy, and it's all things. It's everything. It is, and yes, perfectly balanced is just another way of saying that. And the more, after the fact, because of course, in session, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't remember what I perceived 5 minutes ago. It's only after the fact that you take a step back, you take a breather, you come back and you look at things and you start thinking about it and piecing it together. Like, what do I actually have here? What is this saying? And it's saying exactly the way that you just put it. I really couldn't put it any better. But the more, at least to me, the more I thought about it, the more it actually just kind of makes logical sense. Even in, let's just say, like a more Western Christian kind of worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Well, didn't God create the devil?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Sure, of course. So, yeah, God created all things.
Which also leads back to that whole idea of this thing costing them something. It's generally being that they're a creation as well, and maybe the opposite, or the opposite polarity of whatever is going on here, and to give things context, to give things somewhat more meaning, but more, how do you learn? You make mistakes, you get hurt, you learn, and then you move on and you decide to do different things. You can't do that without those other things there. I said it more succinctly, I think, in that show. It might have been in the Tailspin show, but it seems as if that it's quite possible that they're of the same creation we are. They might be further along. They might be on a different operating modality, where in which some are service to self and some are service to others, and that there is no good or evil. It's only service to self or service to others. Now that comes from the Law of One material. It's hard to say, because there's some dubious beginnings to that material as well. Government influenced, supposedly, with GATE program or something else. I just saw that stuff, so I'm not sure what I'm really saying here, other than it seems as if balance between service to self and service to others is ultimately the idea, or the goal, so to speak. And that's just a personal observation. That's not a remote viewing data sort of thing. And I keep saying that because Ed Dames would go out on a limb and not say he was out on a limb. Well, he'd say he's out on a limb, but he wouldn't say it's his opinion, or it's his inference from data. And it got him into a lot of trouble, and it caused a lot of damage over the years. But yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Wild stuff. Very, very interesting. That was a big question that I've been wanting to ask and just clarify, because I remember when I think it was Morgan that said that really captured me, but it also makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let me rip through a couple of comments here, or questions. Is there anybody that you've seen from remote viewing data that has escaped the soul trap? And if so, where have they gone?
Personally, no.
Okay.
I have a quick answer to that. And
yes.
Excuse me. I think, oh geez, I'll be as quick as I can. Okay. I think it's not so easy as there's just this particular sequence or set of steps that you follow and you're scot-free or anything. I think there's individual components, there's individual choices that need to be made. Individual personal discernment needs to be achieved and maintained. That starts in life. Okay. That doesn't start after the fact. That doesn't start, when the time, you need to start planning for, just like, I mean, I'm not a parent, but my parents are great. And I will always think of, when I was kind of entering my teenage years, my mom would always say to me, you're kind of at the point now where it's like, we've done the best we can. You're going to make the choices that you're going to make. So that is to say that she prepared me for those scenarios that I was going to encounter and important choices I would have to make on my own. She prepared me for that ahead of time. And both my parents did. And I think it's very similar in this case. You have to start preparing for those big choices. I mean, preferably now, honestly. But yeah, I have seen I personally ran a session that was a topical search on the concept of death. And what I showed there was that, back to our earlier conversation about the spark, spirit, soul, whatever, I showed that leaving the body and effectively dissipating into nothing, becoming at one, it seemed, with reality. Like, that was, again, as best as I can describe it. So, hey, there's something, that I have seen.
Okay, very interesting. And okay, awesome. Hold on, let me actually put up a topic here so people know we're doing subscriber questions. I got a bunch more, and we may not hit every single one, but I want to just rapid fire a few more. Somebody asked a really good question about star seeds. I don't know what you guys think about that even concept of star seeds, but they asked, do star seeds leave after death, or are they also caught up in this and get recycled? The thing that I thought of when you think of star seeds is like maybe the Nebuchadnezzar in the Matrix hacking in remotely, and they're not in the system. They kind of come in and they leave. Is that a thing that either of you guys have seen in the data?
The only thing I can infer on that is that general concept of consciousness from other worlds or other systems coming here to help out. There's evidence for it in the data. The data would say that it's possible, but it seems as if they have to participate. They have to go in, forget, go through life, at some point remember, and that's the tricky part, is remembering. I'm familiar with the term. I'm familiar with the movement. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much I personally buy into it. But I've had some spiritual things happen to me that I can't really explain thus yet. But I would say yes, that there is a possibility, a probability that they're here. It's just a question of, are they going to be able to do what they need to do?
Yeah, and oh my God.
Everything okay? Technical issues?
Oh, I thought I lost it.
Oh.
Okay, no, I didn't. It just a new page opened.
Oh, you lost it, all right.
Well, fair enough. No, I just want to say on terminology, star seeds is not exactly a defined and understood term, so it's hard. I'm not going to say, because I don't even know what star seed means.
Fair enough. Okay, another question. I don't know what this is, but it was asked. Do you guys know what is the white void? I'm not sure myself.
I'm not familiar with the idea or concept.
Okay. Well, maybe that's just inside the white light. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Real quick, if it is something like that, we have this idea of soul or whatever being trapped by the light, and then like this corridor between the light and processing plant, so to speak. It's a kind of a bad way of saying it, but it could be this corridor they're referring to. I'm not sure.
What are NPCs or non-human intelligences embedded in this reality? I think you guys talked about that in one of your sessions.
Geez, that's a kind of a potentially touchy subject, but Dan, did we have that directly in the session work?
I think it was inferred.
I think so
inferred
too,
from the data,
and then
they exist. Yeah,
to kind of correlate. There's the concept in antiquity of what is it? There's hylic, psychic, and pneumatic. And those are kind of like the three levels of spirituality. The hylic is basically pure materialistic, and they're considered to potentially, have either no soul or possibly like a very diminished soul. The psychic is kind of somewhere in between and can kind of go either way. And then the pneumatic is purely spiritual and has the potential to escape. Okay. So, it's not a new concept. I mean, NPC is like a modern day, video game analogy, but the concept of those not just without spiritual connection, but without the ability to gain spiritual connection is not a new one.
So it's not exactly when you talk about NPCs, because the way that I've understood it, or when I hear it, is it's just straight up almost like an AI program embedded in a body that has no connection. But what you're more saying is, no, it's perhaps a diminished soul, almost a soul that could be cut off from the fabric of connection of maybe empathy or these different things, but still a soul of sorts?
What I would say to that, we've looked at the idea of human ego, and surprise, surprise, our friends the space dicks are there at the origin of such a thing. When we look at free will and destiny, we get this idea that somewhere along the lines you have an autopilot, and this idea of an autopilot I would liken to the idea of ego. We also have, and this is just relying on current understanding, that there's only a certain amount of the population that has some sort of internal dialogue. I would cumulatively take, in my own opinion, the data that we've gotten from the source of ego. Ego itself is a topical search, and then the idea of free will and destiny together with outside data, and I would make that out on a limb sort of opinion that, yeah, I think that they do exist.
Okay.
What that looks like on a soul level, I can't contemplate at the moment, but yeah.
How do animals, I'm looking at my dog right here, who's the most amazing creature on in my world. How do animals play into the, are they also trapped, or are they more free than us? How does that work from the data that you've seen?
I don't have much to say to that. I've had many dogs over the years. I would say they're sentient, but because the idea of, I don't know. I'm on the fence on this one.
Okay. And can deceased relatives be warned, right? They've been recently deceased, be warned about avoiding the light, or maybe even once they've followed the light to somehow get out of that astral plane? Is there any way to do that as far as you guys know from the data?
Not that I'm aware of. I had come across this material before my dad checked out. I don't know. I'm not sure, because it's almost instantaneous within a few moments after. Now, my own personal experience, like I was there when he passed. I was open and available to what was going on in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I did have impressions that dead relatives were there to come collect him, sort of thing.
Okay.
I had been aware of Ingo's work and then Monroe's work at the time, and I did get a chance to talk to him beforehand. I was like, "Hey, when you get out, try to calm down, move around." I did not say anything because it was hard for me at the time to really take the data that we had at the time and say, definitely don't go into this light.
Right.
Like I didn't, and not only that, but it's also kind of encroaching on somebody else's free will, so to speak. That
Sure.
even itself is a difficult statement to be making. But yeah, that's about everything I can really say about that. I wish I had said something to him about it, but I don't think he would have believed me or listened to me at the time.
I've thought about that too, right? I think people have to come to a certain realization independently. I've thought about this exact same thing in terms of sharing it. And I think the best we can do, I imagine, is doing what you guys are doing, or just speaking about it more so it gets more into the ether and people can have true independent awakenings. Okay, we're going to end on this because I know, look, I'm a big fan of, me, right? Guys on this channel, I'm a big fan of positivity and just trying to push that because it's good for us, it's good for ourselves, it's good for each other. And ultimately, by the way, I'm not talking about artificial, I mean real positivity. And there is positivity to be extracted in this whole narrative of what's happening. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan and ask this final question. For those of us who may be listening to this information, may be blown away by it, the one thing that you do talk about is that ultimately we do have sovereignty. We can, if we choose, exit this cyclic existence, as the Tibetan Book of the Dead says. How do we do that? Take it away. Is that too much?
No, yeah and no. We've talked about it a couple times tonight, that we're the power source for all of this. It's a natural reoccurring cycle that happens that's been corrupted. And ultimately, the reason why it's been corrupted is to get at our energy, at our source. Now, you could probably argue that there's lessons involved with that, but ultimately, we've got this idea of the spark inside the meat suit that generates the energy that they're taking. I had several experiences. One that I remember intimately was the end of a 6 or 7 year relationship, and feeling some energetic things in the dark night, so to speak, of that relationship. And I've had some physical experiences. I see the data, and I keep hearkening back to that same lunar wave data that we had. That there's two lovers that are in a cage. There's a cop outside, doing something with his baton. There's cameras. There's people watching, and ultimately they don't care what's going on around them because of what they've got on the inside, and not only figuratively but actually. Ultimately, we have the sovereignty, we have the choice, because they have to trick you into this because of the legal fine print that might have been the end, the downfall of the planet at some point before humans, or some former version of humans, or even the essence or the spark of God was put into this, whatever we call this, dream, simulation, pit, whatever you want to call it. Ultimately, we have the choice, and ultimately we have that moment of death, that moment of release, where we have the opportunity to change it. We have the opportunity to make a different choice, have the opportunity to not go in that light, and to obey those warning signs that are there. Observe it, try to calm down because you're in shock, because you're in a very difficult and new situation, at least for this lifetime. And hopefully you can be of the sound mind to make the right choice. And even if you do, you may find yourself in another catch point. We've got this whole idea from, Egyptians or the Gnostics, or even as far back as something like Thoth, where they got this whole plan of how to navigate the underworld, or how to have the right names to call off and open the right portals and the right gates. I hope it's not that difficult. I hope it's just as simple as saying no, and I'm going to go over there, and I'm going to hang out, I'm going to meditate for a little bit, and then I'm going to make the right choice. And it seems through the data that ultimately you might wind up in a catch-all of a life review. Now, that is also a natural process that could also be corrupted. Maintain your sovereignty, maintain your identity, maintain your choice, and I think you'll do fine. It's a great adventure, and the death is only the beginning.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think so. And I just want to add, to 100%, ultimately our message is a positive one. Absolutely it is. Knowing is half the battle. Okay. Knowing is half the battle. And once you know, you are in a much better position to decide and to act. And we can do that in our everyday lives by living honestly and honorably on a day-to-day basis. It's hard work, but anything worth pursuing is hard work. Remote viewing was and is hard work. It was absolutely worth it, all day, every day. And to that end, I think that considering these things, using and developing your ability to discern, to really pierce the veil and see things for what they are, expanding your perception is something that you can do. You can do that starting today, and you can do it every day. And if you do so diligently, you will start to see advances in that arena. And that, I think, is the first step to true personal empowerment. And that's ultimately what Intuitive Underground is all about, is individual empowerment, sovereignty of the individual and of us as a species.
Amazing, guys. This was incredible. This was everything I hoped it would be and more. And I'm going to put a link. Obviously, if you guys have stuck around to the end of this video, let's go legend. And also, but I'm going to put a link to their YouTube channel in the description, as well as their website. Check them out. Holy smokes. Hopefully your mind is blown and you're feeling good, you're feeling positive. Because ultimately, if what we are discussing here is the reality, is the nature of reality, we must face it, we must acknowledge it, and then we must move forward. And there is a way forward, is what I'm gathering from the data that's been presented here. And so this is all beautiful, amazing stuff. Thank you guys so much for joining. And if you stuck around to the end, you're especially legendary. I really appreciate it. That's all we got for you guys. And we'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.